Welcome to the third video in the series Overcoming Fear. In the last couple of sections, we started by talking about fear, and then by talking about the opposite of fear, which was love. We found a little snippet from the Bible, which says that perfect love casts out fear, but that raises a lot more questions, and I never like to take just one little half sentence out of the Bible out of context. So this time I want to add some context and also adds some more information to this idea that fear and love are opposites, and especially answers the question, where does love come from? God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness on the day of judgment, because as God is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. We love because God first loved us. This is a clear and unique statement. God is love. Let's sit with that for a minute. Every single person, whether they believe in God or not, has some kind of image that comes to mind when they hear the word God. And you'll find that if you ask people about their image of God, it has very little to do with their church or their religion or their beliefs. Two people who have gone to the same church their whole lives can have very different ideas about what the word God means. They can have different images of God. And you can find that a person who is a devout believer and someone who doesn't believe in God at all may still agree on what that image of God is. And so you may not even believe that God is real, but regardless of what you think about God, you're thinking about an image that's in your head. No matter who you are, the word God brings something to mind. So whether or not you believe in God, whether you've read the Bible your whole life, or whether you're skeptical or even confident that there is no such thing, I'm asking you to think about that image of God for a minute and relate it to the idea that God is love. Because I've talked to a lot of people about God, and my experience is that most people, regardless of what they believe, have an image of God that focuses more on God as a ruler or a judge. So when you think about God as a ruler, as a powerful being, you might think of one of the most common images of God, an old white man with a big white beard sitting on a throne. That image doesn't come from the Bible at all. That's the ancient Greek depiction of Zeus, king of the gods. And if you know anything about Greek mythology, you'll know that Zeus was no more loving or good than any human being. And if you look around the world, most people in most places have worshipped some kind of being who they imagine to be great or powerful, and they attach to that being whatever indicated power in their culture. There's absolutely nothing special, nothing unique, nothing biblical or Christian about describing God primarily as a ruler. There's nothing Christian about putting God's ability to rule, God's sovereignty, at the center of who God is. Now, the Bible certainly says that God rules everything and says that God is powerful, but so do a lot of other different books and religions and traditions. Those aspects of the Bible's image of God aren't central to who God is as described in the Bible. Now there's another common image of God as a judge, someone who makes laws and enforces them by rewarding good people and punishing bad people. And this is kind of a step forward because it still pictures God primarily as a ruler, as someone who's making things happen, telling people what to do, giving orders. But it does put more of an emphasis on right and wrong. When you talk about God as a judge, There's the idea that God is fair and is making sure that people get what they deserve. We're going to come back to this image of God in more detail later, because the idea of reward and punishment is built deeply into most people's image of God. And even beyond our image of God, that idea of reward and punishment has a lot of control over how we relate to each other. So for now, I'll just say this. It's true that the Bible does talk about reward and punishment, but this passage that we read notes that a person who experiences God love doesn't worry about punishment. It says, fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. So this is a hint that God isn't primarily a ruler or a judge, and it's a direct statement that what God is not a sovereign, what God is not a judge, what God is love. It doesn't say God is loving, it says God is love. Now that might seem like a little difference, but it's vitally important. A king can be loving, a judge can be loving, you and I can be loving, but we can't be love. Saying God is love puts love at the absolute center of who and what God is, so that everything else that we say about God takes second place before the central definition of who and what God is. God is love. So we read that God is love, and then we read this. We love because God first loved us. This is the answer to the question we posed earlier. How do we find that perfect love? The answer proposed in the Bible, and the answer that we'll be exploring from this point forward, is that God is the source of our love, and that we humans can and should turn to God for the love we need. We're meant to have a relationship with God, and that relationship is meant to be one of total and unconditional love. That experience of unconditional and total love, an experience that's not just psychological, it's spiritual, overcomes fear in us. When we meet God, we are loved, and that empowers us to love others. Let's say that again. When we meet God, we are loved, and we're empowered to love others. This is a starting point for evaluating images of God, both the images in our mind and the images other people present to us. No image can really capture or describe God. That's why we call it an image. A picture of someone doesn't capture everything about that person, and our images of God are infinitely worse at capturing who God is. But still, just like some pictures reveal a truth about a person or a thing that other pictures lack, some pictures are better than others at reflecting God. So when people talk about God, they say different things and often contradict each other, and even your own experience may give you contradictory ideas about who and what God is. But in all those situations, you can start with God is love. If an image of God in your head or an image of God that someone else presents to you, if that makes you afraid, it's taking you away from God. If people talking about God are promoting fear, trying to scare you into feeling attacked or making you think you're in danger, they aren't leading people to God no matter what else they say. If an experience you have makes you afraid and brings you closer within yourself, that experience doesn't come from God. If God is love, then anything that isn't love is not God, especially fear, which, as we just read, is totally removed by God's love. So I want to take a minute and think about this and ask you the question for this week. What's an image of God that sticks with you? It doesn't have to be one you believe in. You can share it in writing, you could even draw it, whatever it is that brings you to an image of God that reflects what you have heard or what you personally believe about God. And for the first time, I want to throw out, after that question, an experiment. Find an image of God that doesn't fit naturally for you, an image of God that seems kind of uncomfortable. Think about God as though that image were real, and see what you learn, either about God or about people who have that image. We'll see you next time.